Okay, so I'm back with another Pete rant. Today, I'm ranting about the Acolyte. I did a sort of small video on this yesterday, but I think that I just want to sort of do one great big catch-all video about the Acolyte and my feelings about it and stuff. Because there's a lot of drama going on with it right now, and it's worth just sort of me talking about it because it's something I want to talk about. So, I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, going all the way back to the originals. Obviously, loved those as a kid. Grew to love the prequels, although it took me a while. Started off liking the sequels and then didn't when Last Jedi came out, and so I'm sort of, you know, huge Star Wars fan. I absolutely love it, and it feels like even when something really poor is being made from Star Wars, I still have to watch it, engage with it, just to sort of have an opinion on it. But in terms of Acolyte, it was unusual because when I first heard about the concept of it, when he first pitched it as an idea at D23 years ago, I thought it was brilliant. I was really into the idea, and I thought it sounded really, really good. The trailers came out and they were heavily hated, and I thought it was a bit pointless, really. I didn't really see what everyone was going on about. It's like, you need to see this show in context before you start ripping chunks out of it. And I saw a smallish preview at the end of when I went to go see Phantom Menace, which actually made me think twice and go, oh, this looks actually pretty good. So I did go into it with an open mind. I did go into it wanting to enjoy it, and some of the Star Wars TV shows I've really enjoyed, and some of them I haven't. I mean, some of them, other ones that other people have hated, and I've not minded. I didn't really mind. I liked Obi-Wan, for example, which a lot of other people seem to hate, and I liked Book of Boba Fett, which loads of people seem to hate. You know, wasn't a big fan of Mandalorian season 3, but huge fan of season 1 and 2, especially season 1 of Mandalorian. So I'm not someone who thinks everything Disney has ever done with Star Wars is a complete mess, or has ruined it. But so far, it's sort of, the batting average isn't that great, should we say? And it doesn't seem like the stuff is all that great. But some of it has been good. So I went into watching it with an open mind, and it started good for about 5 minutes, and then it started to immediately lose its quality. Like, as soon as Carrie Moss gets killed off in the first 5 minutes, I was like, okay, all right. I kind of expected she would be like a main character in the show, but never mind. I've got these other characters. Oh, they're not very good. Okay, so it was his other character. Oh, he's pretty good, and his other character, oh, she's pretty good. All right, so they're good. And then one of these characters got killed off halfway through the show, and I was like, okay, so she's got killed off, so there's still these other characters that are okay. And at the end of the season, the only character I still cared about died, and I was just like, I just don't care anymore. Like, I just think it was a rubbish show in so many ways, and each episode got worse and worse. It was almost like it didn't start off particularly smart, and it got stupider as it went. And now, of course, the show cost a ridiculous amount of money, $180 million, and it didn't get renewed for a second season, which was pretty obvious, to be honest. And I don't think people want to make it into a culture war thing about, like, because there were loads of obviously far right YouTubers that hated it, and people on the left trying to defend it. But, like, really, it just comes down to, was it a good or a bad show? And the reality was, it was a bad show. Like, people on the left, yeah, you can support it, and obviously, if you like it, support it, because some people did like it, and taking that away from you, if you genuinely like the Acolyte, you genuinely liked it. But there were so many problems with it in my point of view, and I'm just going to get into some of them now. I mean, there's two sides of this, and the problem with Acolyte was it was a double whammy. It was rubbish at both of these things. One was, when you're watching a show, there's two kind of ways I'm watching it. If it's a franchise, I'm watching it with my Star Wars head on, going, how is this good for Star Wars? How is this relating to the lore? Is it well integrated? Because Star Wars itself is not the kind of thing where you expect to see the most amazing dialogue, the most incredible dialogue you've ever heard, or even the most incredible performances you've ever seen. It's set in a certain world. There's a certain expectation that comes with Star Wars. So I don't expect to be watching fucking Citizen Kane and watching a Star Wars show. And the other side of it is the lore and the world is exciting and interesting to me. And then there's the other side of it, which is just, as a TV show, as any show you would watch, whether it was related to, not related to a franchise, just does it stand as a good show? Does it work as a good show? Has it got a good, has it got like I say, not necessarily a groundbreakingly amazing script, but a script where what the characters say makes sense, and what the motivations are clear, and the performances are strong, and we know who the characters are, and we care, and we know what they're about. And it failed at everything. It failed absolutely every one of those things. Like, didn't know what it was about. Like, let's start with the things just as a show before we get into the Star Wars lore, because the Star Wars lore stuff can be sort of taken with a grain of salt. A lot of people who aren't huge into the lore of Star Wars will probably watch it and not care. I mean, my issue with Andor, as much as I loved it, was in terms of the Star Wars lore of Andor, it felt a lot of times like it wasn't Star Wars. To me, it felt a lot of times like it didn't belong in the Star Wars universe. And I think that, like, as much as I love Andor, I did feel at times it just didn't feel like Star Wars to me. Like, you got characters stood around swearing, characters carrying machine guns or automatic weapons. I'm sorry, that's just not Star Wars. And the complete omission of any kind of alien races or any aliens at all in it, which Tony Gill even said was something he intentionally did because he didn't like aliens because it was distracting. I was like, well, that is part of Star Wars. Star Wars is mainly a galaxy filled with aliens. It's not really, humans aren't the main species in Star Wars. And so I was thinking, well, it's great, but it doesn't, in terms of Star Wars lore, in terms of Star Wars, it doesn't feel like it. But as a show, as a regular show that you could watch on anything, Andor was brilliant. I mean, like in terms of its script, in terms of performances, in terms of like what the episodes were about and what the characters were about, and how it set things up and paid things off. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. It had some of the best acting and scripts that we've seen associated with Star Wars. So there was a give and take there. There was like, well, it doesn't really feel like Star Wars, but on the other hand, it's got great acting. And so if this had been the same thing, where I would have been like, well, the finer points of it don't make any sense with Star Wars canon, but it actually is good. Like, the way that it's done is really good. If this was like the Breaking Bad or something, or the Sopranos of Star Wars, like, it was a totally different look at it. It was a totally different perspective. But it wasn't that. It really wasn't the Breaking Bad or Star Wars or Fight Club, like all these things that she sort of talked about referring to. It was nothing like that. It was like a rubbish CW show. Like, not even one of the good ones. It felt very, very like it didn't know who its audience was. There were times where it was goofy, when it wanted to be a serious murder mystery, and then the murder mystery thing just seemed to get completely forgotten about when you brought in this witches and this stupid witches of all the chanting and stuff. It just got so bad, and the mystery that they built up didn't sustain the runtime of the show. Like another show that me and my partner just finished watching called Supercell on Netflix. Now that's a show that there's no franchise. It's nothing. No one knows what the heck it is. It's just come out of nowhere. It's probably a pretty small budget, but it was really flipping good. Really well written. Really amazing characters where you really cared about them. You cared about what they were doing, and the mystery of it was intriguing. And each episode, a good mystery is building on it and adding more aspects, and you're more interested each episode what exactly is going on. It sounds simple, but it's difficult to really do, and the Acolyte didn't do it. Like, it didn't build on a mystery in any meaningful way. In fact, it tore down the mystery. It was like the more things got revealed, the less interesting the mystery became, and it was like, oh, okay, so it's not this. Like, it builds up this great big thing that the Jedi did, that they hid, and you think, oh, what sort of thing was it? Like, what did they do? And when it's finally revealed in like the second last episode, I was like, that was it. Like, they didn't really do anything wrong. Like, I don't know what you're trying to make. Like, what were they supposed to do? Just, yeah, I'm not going into the weeds of the show, but the point was that I was like, was they didn't really do anything that wrong, given what their responsibilities are. And yeah, like, I don't get what the point was. Like, what you're trying to make this point that the Jedi were these oppressive rulers, but they didn't behave like that. Not really. Like, if you're going to make that point that the Jedi are these repressive rulers, which I think is a stupid idea to start off with, and again against Star Wars canon, but you've got to make it work with the way that the characters are and the way it's set up and stuff. And they didn't. Like, they didn't make it work. It was really weird, and it felt like all over the place. So as a show, it just didn't really work. The characters' motivations changed mid-episode. Like, you'd have 1 minute that one of the characters doing this. 1 minute the character wants to kill all the Jedi. The next minute the character wants to wants to turn themselves into the Jedi, and then when they meet a Jedi, they start trying to kill that Jedi, and then those Jedis in the episode sacrifice their lives multiple times. Again, in the episode showing that Jedi are selfless, because there were so many instances where Jedi are actually doing defensive things that just don't even get acknowledged by the characters or cast. Like, some of the cast members legit get saved by Jedis and are alive just because of what those Jedis have done. Yet that doesn't matter one iota to them. They don't care. They still hate Jedis and still want them all to die or whatever. And it's like, well, what is it that's so... You've not made a good enough case as why the Jedis are so bad. Like, they repress your emotions as something. They have this monopoly on the Force and they want to control how people use it. But it's like, well, yes, because it's really dangerous. Like, any highly dangerous thing you have has a number of regulations that would go along with it to make sure you're being done safely. And if you're not abiding by those things, then yeah, the Jedi are going to come and have a look at it. Like, that's just the nature, and I think it's extremely volatile. Like, if I think of, like, for example, if you've got like a nuclear power plant or something, right, or you do nuclear stuff, someone who will, there's going to be a system of governance that regulates that. There's going to be people who are going to come in and do safety checks and things like that. They're not just going to let you go and make nuclear power, use nuclear power however you want with no conditions. Like, it's going to have some conditions because there's going to be repercussions if something goes wrong. So it's like, I see it like that. Like, the Force is this huge power, and it can be extremely good and it can be extremely bad, and you've got to be careful what people are using it for. Like, that's as simple as it was. And it wasn't like there was no evidence that the cult of witches that the Jedi are sort of interfering with were good, or were like in the middle, or were grey or something. That they seemed pretty bad. They seemed pretty dark side. Like, it wasn't like they just seemed like a group of people who were just harmlessly in tune with the Force, and the Jedi came in and was suddenly being awful and like locking them all up or something because they didn't do the Jedi way. Like, they were pretty sketchy, and there was nothing in that community that made you think this is a good community that's like that you would care about. You know, they again didn't give you any reasons to care. Like, the mother of the witches, and I mean, they had a whole episode with focus on the witches, and like, didn't make me care about them at all. Like, just because you're saying, well, these are strong characters because blah blah blah. I'm like, but where is the evidence for it? Well, why would I care? Like, you've not given us enough detail in what they are. Like, some of what they were doing looked really freaking dodgy, and certain things didn't really get explained. Like, this whole ascension, these twins are going, what does that mean? Like, what did that even mean? Like, the ceremony got interrupted. Like, what would it have meant? What were the stakes? What was going to happen? Would it have meant that all the collective consciousness of all those witches was going to go into the two twins? Was it that? It didn't say if it was or it wasn't. And I'm like, well, if that was it, like, you know, just so many things that didn't make any sense, that weren't thought out. That they didn't give us enough information about who the witches were, or what their deal was, to be able to care over what happened to them. And they behaved in a way that was extremely dodgy. Like, they were extremely defensive. They were quite aggressive. Like, one of them mind controlled the young Jedis and stuff. I'm like, well, if you're not dodgy, that's not the way to come across. You know, that is not the way to do it. Like, if they come across as totally legit and the Jedi come in and just been arseholes, that's what they should have done, in my opinion. But that's not what they did. And even the Jedi weren't really being that out of unreasonable. They're being reasonable fairly within a certain spectrum of things. Like, there's a couple of things they messed up with, but I'm sorry, like, when you're a Jedi and your duty is to save innocent people, and you see someone who you think you care about being dissolved by a smoke monster, your instinct is to kill the smoke monster. Like, you see the mother turn into some sort of demonic smoke monster thing, and he kill the Jedi kills him. Like, well, yeah, like what is he meant to do? Like, he's not meant to surely just stand there and assume that this freaking smoke monster thing's not going to either hurt him or hurt the kid. Like, because he's not been giving any information. We've not given information as a viewer what that even meant. Like, if that was just some weird thing that they did, then it didn't mean anything offensive, but the way they read it was offensive, then that could have been understood. But it's like, well, that wasn't explained. It was never explained why did she turn to smoke, you know? Like, they could have just done it in a way that didn't include that anyway. So it's really, really silly. So there's all sorts of really silly things about the Acolyte. And of course it was cancelled, and I wasn't surprised it was cancelled, because we knew the ratings for it. Once the Nielsen ratings for it came out, we knew it wasn't doing well. I don't care how many websites try and say that it had good viewing figures. It did not have good viewing figures at all. That's just wishful thinking. Like, you can think it had good viewing figures if you want, but it didn't. Like, the reality of the cold hard facts is it did not have good viewing figures. It didn't start off great. It went worse. It didn't cause enough interest for the 180 million that they spent on it. So they cancelled it or didn't renew it. And I knew as well that they would, really pretty obviously, if they didn't announce it at D23, it was gone. And now there's this big petition like trying to bring the Acolyte back, and I'm just like it's not going to work. Like, there's a good reason that they can't hit, because it's not made enough money. There's not enough fans out there, and I'm thinking, okay, a lot of people who signed a petition, how many have actually flipping watched it? Like, is it a thing where a load of them are just like, they're just standing up for the cause, and that's why they're signing, and it's just become a political thing? And I'm just like, no, it's not political. It's very, very simple. It's not a good show. Like any show that comes out, the first season, it has to prove that there's enough interest in it to get a second season, and it didn't. Disney obviously looked at it and was like, this hasn't done it. And they're not bothered about the enraged Star Wars fans. They don't care about the enraged Star Wars fans because they didn't care about it with Last Jedi. Because Last Jedi made shitloads of money. They're not bothered. They're bothered about the bottom line. And if the bottom line is this show's not making money, there's a point where that has to be looked at. And like, companies get criticised for flip-flopping and changing direction often. But usually it's going to come down to the reality that they can't do that thing anymore because financially it's not working for them. Like, that's as simple as it is. Like, a lot of business decisions are as simple as that. It's not like they want to side with the toxic side of the fan base. It's like they're like, well, no one watched it. Like, what you want with a Star Wars, or what their idea is, not to just, obviously it should be to cater to original Star Wars fans. We're not even doing that anymore. But it's like everyone wants to grow and increase their audience. You want to grow and increase your audience, So from a certain perspective, I understand the idea of taking on board something that's a bit different to try and get those normal people who don't normally care for Star Wars. Like, who those are left in the world now, I don't know who that is. It feels like Star Wars is such a well-versed part of our culture. I either like it or you don't at this point, but you want to get those people in. But if you lose all the original fans and you don't get those new people in, then you've got to leave it. Like, Last Jedi sort of still made $1 billion, so they weren't so bothered. They sort of saw the repercussions out of Rise of Skywalker, I think, but like, they were not bothered at that point that they'd changed the law and they'd changed things and they'd done stuff that was against what the original fans cared about. They still stuck by it and continued on, and yet with Acolyte they've stopped. And I think it all goes back to Kathleen Kennedy's leadership, where she just doesn't know what Star Wars is about. She doesn't have a passionate understanding of what it is. And I think the biggest problem with the Acolyte is that it's not just that, but Disney plus Disney shows in general, where we have had some good ones. To me, there's a very clear and obvious reason why between the good ones and the ones that don't work, like Acolyte, and it's faithfulness to the themes and ideas that George Lucas was putting into Star Wars. Like, if you watched Mandalorian season 1, which was brilliant, most people agree it was brilliant, and again, it was a big hit with people who weren't huge Star Wars fans. Like, a lot of people watched Mandalorian who saw this cute little alien, and they saw, like, whatever, and they were like, oh, Grogu and stuff, and they watched it and they liked it, and that's fine. I'm not like, Star Wars doesn't have to be just for Star Wars fans. It can be for anybody. And I think everyone who's a Star Wars fan really is fine with that, as long as it's good. And Mandalorian was. And it did both. Like, it absolutely did both. And so did stuff like Rogue One. Like, it's weird because people are like everything Disney Star Wars have done is absolute shit, and it's not the case. Like, some of it has worked really well. Rogue One, brilliant. Andor, well, I've mentioned a few problems with it, but overall good. But then you have stuff like Ahsoka that was just pants, absolutely dreadful, like terrible performance. I'm going to do a review of Ahsoka another time, but rock bottom shit performances. It did tie in better with the lore of Star Wars than the other stuff, but still really boring, uninspired stuff. Not really furthering anything without Ahsoka. It's just repeating what you've already done 1,000 times. And again, stuff like the characters weren't great, really. And Ahsoka, as much as I love Ahsoka in the animated show, she was terrible in Rosario Dawson. Such a terrible job portraying the character. I don't know what's happened. But like, Star Wars feels like, again with that Ahsoka show, it feels like it's just lost its momentum. It's lost its direction. And it's like everyone just stood around in Star Wars because it's Star Wars, but they don't anymore know what it's about. Like, there's nothing holding the whole thing together. And I think that the thing that Star Wars has forgotten about or has lost is that connection to what George Lucas made it for. Like, it was made and created to teach children about a certain kind of morality and make them question certain things as they're coming into adolescence. Make them think, well, is it good to be selfish? What are the repercussions of that? And being selfless, what that means and what that would be and how that would be good. And also things like friendship, forming good friendships and stuff like that. There's all sorts of stuff. And the actual story of Star Wars, really, the Jedi are still the heroes, but there is a lot of stuff of what the Jedi teach which ultimately is proven to be untrue. And so that was what I liked about it. I was like, well, it is sort of, telling a story and doing well, but it's interrogating what it's saying as well. It's not as simple as, well, the Jedi are great, they don't make any mistakes, and that's the ideal, but some of them obviously aren't as good as that. But it also isn't about the idea that they're all this massively corrupt order. And I think the whole morality of Star Wars, it used to be about teaching kids good moral lessons. Like the reality of the morality that's in Acolyte is completely fucked up. It's completely the opposite. It's like, well, and like what it should have been is like a Breaking Bad situation where you watch Breaking Bad and it's about a guy who he starts off with a good intentions. He's got cancer, he wants to provide for his family, he ends up dealing crystal meth. But never when you watch Breaking Bad, you come away from an episode and go, oh, I want to go deal some crystal meth now, I want to live his life. That looks really good. Like, a Sith point of view show should show the dark side and obviously the power that comes with it, because that's what we want to see. But it should also be showing the corruption that comes with it. Like, the best example is something like Godfather. Like Godfather Part 2, you don't end up watching Godfather Part 2 and thinking, oh, I really wish I was Michael Corleone. Like, you come away from that thinking, fucking hell. That is what power does to you. It corrupts you to the soul, where you only care about yourself and you're willing to sacrifice and kill members of your own family to get what you want and to stay on top. And that's what he did. He broke from even his own family traditions of honour and stuff to maintain that power. And that was brilliant. That's why Godfather Part 2 and 1 are amazing, because, again, they're intelligent enough to give the viewers credit and going, we're not actually saying this is a good way to live. We're not actually saying everyone should go and be gangster and start killing people. We're just showing what the life is. And that's what this Acolyte show should have really done, is just show what that would be. But yeah, it didn't. So anyway, I'm going to stop this video now, but that's all I'm going to